Hi, I'm Joe Chapman, and I'm here with Mariana Cabugueira. Mariana is an architect from Portugal that's living in London, and I've been following her work for a lot of years now, and I'm really excited to get to interview her.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. So, when I started following you, I noticed you were a very multifaceted person in which you were able to achieve a lot of things, which is impressive. You had architecture, you had teaching, and you also had working in Web3.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this was fascinating to me because I think a lot of people, when they have one thing in their life, they just choose to focus on that, and then everything else is just downtime. They just want to play on Facebook or Instagram or do nothing. So you're one of these people that's really pushing themselves. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got your start, maybe through your education and your first job.
That's actually what you just said was a really critical point, and that's actually a very big denominator for change. Is what you do with your free time. You just touch it very slightly, but I think that's what actually makes a difference. It's when you reduce your procrastination time to something that is actually productive, or that you enjoy doing it, and you're so lucky that you enjoy and it is productive. I think that's actually what probably made the biggest change in, and one of the reasons why I'm where I am in my career, because I did go through the traditional path of having a 9 to 7 job, which was like Zara 9 to 9. But then at the same time, when I had my free time, it was for everyone, it would be like a scroll or like hours and hours on, I don't know, TikTok, which I still go, was like 1 hour probably. But I was just open another project and have fun with that. That will be my hobby. And in the end, that did create like some products that creates some volume of work, and that is why you know my work, because I decreased the number of procrastination to something that is productive, or it does bring some, let's say, profit with it. So that was important. But the way I started was, apart from the fact that I really like what I do, and that's why it's not really painful time when I'm doing it. I actually enjoy it. I studied in Lisbon. I was a little bit different kind of student, but I'm not a straight A kind of student, not the best one, not everything at all. There are things that I care about, and you can clearly see, and the things that I did not care about, I was terrible, like failing, not even putting my time in it. And then after Lisbon, because I was a bit different, I decided to make a couple of different decisions, like not applying for an internship and not staying in for, the big order of architecture of my country. I decided not to do any of that, and still don't regret not having done any of this. And then I decided to go to London, do a postgrad, extend a little bit my skills on the things that I loved, which was fluid architecture, uh, really digital architecture in a way, and technology. And when I did the postgrad here, I finished, and I had the opportunity of joining Zaha, which was beautiful and very unexpected, because I'm from a small country, and you always think that you should start small and then aim for big, but definitely not the recipe or a rule. So I got into Zaha, and then when I was at Zaha, I started feeling like I was putting a lot of my creativity on Zaha projects, obviously, but then there's a part of you that still wants more, and not more success or not more results. It wants to express and put your creativity in, and like stretch it and do it not just for other people but for yourself. So I was closing one project and then opening another one and finishing every day at midnight, with things that I like doing and love doing. And that brought me to the next project, and the next project was Web3, Wow the World. And then it was, because I saw some very big gaps on my academic years, when it comes to tools and to softwares. That's when I thought maybe I should teach kids to get the skills that I have, and it's not that hard. And teachers are, I don't know why they're usually so bad.
You say it's not that hard, but it really is impressive that, you're working this hard and then you go that extra mile. And like you said, that extra mile, the things you did in your extracurricular have now led on to your second and your third career. But take a step back. So Zaha Hadid obviously is one of the most famous architects, maybe of all time, definitely of the modern era. and a, a lot of people would be, very happy to work there. So that must have been an amazing experience. What kind of projects was the company working on, and how many employees did they have, for example, when you were there, just to give the audience some scale
Mm.
of this company?
So when I started, it was in I think 2018, and I think we were 200 people, and now we are 400, 2025, 2024. So I started as part of the design team. I was doing mostly like big design projects. And it's hard because it was sort of like 2 years ago. But I feel what I was left with the most was the people that work there. They are what obviously it's important to have big projects, and it's like you should be extremely, they're very valuable for the type of clients that they can bring, but it's the people that they can afford to hire that makes it like a diamond in brute. And the people that work there are actually so humble, most of them, but they are so skilled. They are genuinely
Really
so skilled.
the best, are they?
They are the best. Yeah.
And tell us a bit, because these are massive projects. These are skyscrapers in China and, I
Mm.
mean, all over the world. Uh, when you work at a company like this, do they do everything from the initial concept all the way down to the schematic drawings and the installation of everything on site? Or is it mainly a modeling company, and then you have partners in the country that you
Yeah.
maybe work with to do the schematics?
Well, it works a little bit. It works the same. You have both options, and sometimes there are clients who want you to develop just concept design, and that actually happens in my studio. Most clients, they do come and ask for concept design projects because I mean, they see that you're good at that, at doing concept design. So they would think that you would cover the concept design. And then some clients are interested to, or you make the project complex enough and to tell them that you need me for the next phase, and then you're hired for the next phase. And I think Zaha's, like many design studios, they go through exactly the same. And I think now, personally, I understand that it's a struggle to jump from concept design to schematic and to DD.
Hmm.
You need to send them like the proof of capabilities in a way, which Zaha, obviously, as Zaha architects, they have. But it depends on the clients. They usually come for concepts.
I think that it's very misunderstood in the world, because a lot of people build houses or apartments or offices. I mean, real estate as a whole is the largest asset class in the world. So there's an incredible amount of building that's going on. And I was even looking at statistics that by 2050, it's going to be an explosive growth of even more infrastructure and even more buildings. So there's no stopping that's happening. But I think a lot of people don't know the process. So is it possible, for example, to have uh, architects, lighting designers, landscape designers? These are all from different companies, and they all have to kind of come together
Hmm.
to make it work. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking if it's possible, if
Then
how it
just
goes.
how it goes in general is, from my work as a developer, I my job is to pull all of those people together. So, and when I'm working with clients to do contracting work, they're often asking me, how does it work? Do we hire one company or do we hire multiple companies?
Oh, I see what you mean.
And the complexity of it. So, how do you like to work? I guess would be more of my question.
Yeah, it depends. So usually, if it's a project that I really like, I I have worked with other consultants in the past, and I always made sure that I had like a balance by the end of the projects of who performed well, which light company performed well, which landscape company would I recommend, which ones do I relate the most. So I have a list of all which contractor would I like to work with. So I'll have a list of experience that are like spread around the world, which is something that you should learn when you're working at Saha if you're interested in having your business. But it's something that I always kept like attention to. Who are we working with? Who are our contractors? Who are we working for? And so on, like a whole list. So now with my studio, I would always try to recommend the people, the contractors that I want to work with. So I usually ask, "Oh, do you have a consultant for engineer?" And they say, "Yeah, the client has a consultant for engineer." I'm like, doesn't the client want to like try the one that I have experience with because they are experienced with this type of geometry? Like I can trust them with this with complex geometry. I've seen them doing it. And not all engineers know how to do complex geometry, right? They know the basics. So that one would be the first one that I would recommend, even if I'm just a contractor for design, even if I'm just consultant, a design consultancy. I propose the consultants that I know that would make my design come alive, like at prime results.
I think that's really fascinating. I think both of us are young right now for this industry. I think there's a lot of people in the industry, obviously, who are much older that have experience,
Yeah,
but we're starting now to gather our favorite people.
exactly.
And you want to find the best interior decorators, the best
Yeah.
landscape designers, the best lighting people. And then over time, you kind of build your dream team that you can recommend
Exactly.
when you're doing projects. And so it's kind of an exciting time. And with the kind of globalized world and with the internet, we're able to kind of choose people from anywhere around the world.
Plus that.
So I think being a very social person, or being a very someone that likes to explore, I think is important for this industry,
Yeah.
because you go there, you meet new architects, engineers, material suppliers.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why it also supports the what we were speaking about before, like having a digital portfolio with, I don't know, 6 years of experience showing your projects. That brings your consultants also to your page and just see, well, actually, this is the type of architecture that we want in our company. So I'm doing light design. I want to be part of that project. And then in the way, like you connect with each other, right? If they have a project, they connect to you. If you have a project, you connect to them. But the goal is to have, like you said, the portfolio of consultants that you want to bring in. But usually clients, they come with their own people.
yeah.
Unfortunately.
And the other thing is that construction and projects are sometimes have long lead times. You could first have a concept of a project, and it's years until it's finished. I think a lot of people, maybe working in different industries, don't realize, a project, whether similar maybe to film or similar to building anything in general, there's a lot of different stages that go into it. And so I don't know. You're obviously at different stages with different clients in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also it comes with, they need to trust you, right?
Hmm.
It's
You need to,
also a trusting game.
you need to build a relationship, and it has to be someone you like. I don't know if you could build a relationship with an architect or an engineer that you didn't like and have to speak to them every day. So it has to be someone that is good at what they do,
Yeah,
and you have a great relationship with them, and you trust them.
exactly. Fully agree.
Um, so, and let's talk one more thing about your style of architecture in the real world. Is uh, a lot of architects want to build with square edges, right? Because it's cheaper and it's like easier to do for engineering. A lot of your design has a lot of curves, a lot of round edges. Am I right to say that?
Always.
Okay. So
No shame.
tell us why you like curves. And I think there's just one anecdote from Frank Gehry that I like about this. I think he said, one curve, $1. Actually, it might be from Zaha quoting Frank Gehry, but he said one curve, $1, two curves, $2, three curves, $10. And so it does add a lot of cost, but obviously it adds beauty that comes with it. So just tell us a little about that.
Well, it just touched on one of the most important aspects of it, which is the beauty side. But let's not get into that so fast. Um, Well, listen, I don't understand why, since I joined university and started doing architecture, I don't understand why we are being encouraged so much to create sharp corners and 90-degree spaces when there's nothing in nature that points us to those kind of geometries. And that's where we come from, right? And I'm not even saying from where we come from biologically, because there's nothing sharpy there as well. But in the past of dwelling of our civilization, it's always been with nature and within nature, and that's kind of how we spend more time in non-sharp corners and organic spaces, living in them, than in sharp corners. And then we made this up. And I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think it's fucking horrible. Cities, sharp corners, 90 degrees, the whole building environment, it is quite shocking for me. And it is most of the times hurtful, actually, when you're walking on the streets. 90% of the times it does hurt your aesthetics. And I would give credit to this hurt to the 90-degree and to the sharp corner. And I think it's a system that was working some times ago when we developed the T structure and we said, this is cheap. Oh, this defies gravity. If we add a T above of another T, we have two floors and then we profit more. And then if we build in vertical with all T's all piled up, we will profit even more. And no one really thought about, oh, but there are actual humans living there. We are biological beings. We are round. We have curves. We adapt to curves. Curve adapt to curve. Why wouldn't our sense of comfort come from curve? Why would this sharp corner here and this ceiling make you feel more embraced in space than an actual curved space? So I think it's a missed opportunity.
Okay.
And it came from profits, and I hope it changes. As soon as it becomes cheaper to do the round corner, I'm pretty sure our comfort levels will also rise.
That's very interesting. I've actually never heard that argument before that people would be against the sharp corners, but I'll start to um, try to observe that when I'm walking. My observation of beauty comes a lot from materials. So I'm really tactile when it comes to materials. So when I walk around a city, I often look at, is it beautiful or is it ugly based on the materials that they use? So I love a limestone. I love really beautiful brickwork. I love, old hardwood that looks really nice. Um, so we could move on to beauty a little bit, and we could say, I could ask you, do you think that beauty is everybody? Do you think it's objective or subjective?
Do you feel like you crave for beauty in spaces
Me personally, I do.
and crave for beauty in people?
Yes.
Is it subjective or objective?
For me, it's objective, but I would say that I'm controversial in that fact because I've asked a lot of people that, and people say no, it's subjective. Art can be anything. It can be modern art. It can be classical art, and I argue pretty vehemently
Mhm.
that art and beauty are objective.
Objective. Okay.
But I'll ask you. I can.
I live the same struggle as you.
Okay.
At some point, I think that creating beauty should be the bare minimum, especially if you're creating for a long span of time. So beautiful is a bare minimum criteria. But then the question is, so who says that it's beautiful or not? And for the longest time, I thought it was objective. And I would study the Greeks, so I would study the symmetry and study balance. And then when you actually think about beauty in people, you understand that it's extremely subjective. I mean, we could go for the standards of symmetry, but then when you get to know someone, for some reason that person becomes there's some kind of trickery in your perception of beauty that comes with your previous knowledge, and I agree that this also applies to architecture. If you look at a piece of architecture as it is raw, you would have a first impression of beauty, but if it comes with memories, if there is an emotional background on your perception, which is a trick, you will see a beauty that you didn't see before. So there's no answer to that. That's not objective or subjective. The only answer is it should be done, and that's for the creators. It should be a criteria that is part of the creating process. It needs to be there.
It should be the so I would take it a step further, and it should not maybe only be the central criteria, not the only criteria, but a really central criteria. Because when you're building buildings, you're building them for 50 years, 100
Yeah.
years, 1,000 years for some buildings, and you are affecting the enjoyment of every single person that walks by them and every single person that lives in them, but it's many more people that walk by them. So you have to make sure that it's beautiful and it makes people's lives a little bit better. So the reason I believe it's objective, and I'm quoting Roger Scruton here, who's one of my favorite philosophers, is that he says there is certain ideals that go with beauties. For example, proportion, symmetry,
This is
balance,
Greek.
right? And I don't think you can get away with that. I think you could take two objects, and it could be in any realm. Let's say you take a plant, for example, and you show one plant that has all of those, right? So let's say it's a tree, some kind of tree, and the tree has been deprived of water and deprived of sunlight, and it's grown in horrible ways. And then you have another tree that's been given
Mm.
a lot of water and a lot of nutrients and a lot of fertilizer, and it's round and it's perfect and it has great proportion. And you show someone those two photos, and these are kind of uncontroversial things talking about plants rather than talking about buildings or people, which might be a bit more subjective, like you were saying, because a person has a personality or a building has a purpose or a time period. But if you just take the two trees and you put them side by side, two photographs of them, and you ask 1,000 people, I'm almost certain every single person would say that the healthy tree, the proportional tree, the balanced tree is more beautiful.
I understand that side. I understand that there is an immediate impact towards something visual that would say it's beautiful or not, but I still think that your memory plays a very big part of your answer. So probably if I grew up next to that tree
Mm.
with my grandmother, I'm not gonna think about my grandmother, but there's something, an emotional attachment to it that I would say that one is the most beautiful one. So there still is a big element of subjectivity. And for example, your house or this room, probably for your brother, it's like a magical space. And for me, it's a white room with nice equipment. But our sense of beauty of the space alters substantially with your memory and your experience of spaces with something similar. So there's still a side of subjectivity, but then the question would be, what's the immediate response on a clean slate
Mm.
to everyone towards something, and how much would it be affected by memory or by previous experiences?
But I would say that those are sometimes culture and where you grow up can actually distort your understanding of
Yeah,
beauty. So, for example, modern art, right? To a lot of people, a pile of bricks just thrown on the floor, right,
yeah,
just is nothingness, right?
right.
And a lot of people have applied um, meaning behind it or say that it's beautiful, right? And if you had no understanding of the meaning, that it's some kind of part installation, you looked at it and just trying to say, is this beautiful or not beautiful? It's not beautiful, is it? It's nothing, right?
It depends, but if you take that pile of brick and if you have them right here in this white space, I'll probably ask a million times, "Oh, what is this?" And I'll probably think about it or be intrigued by it. Will I say that it's beautiful? I don't know. It depends on the type of brick. But it's a shiny red, I would probably think it is beautiful. I think it's not a black and white answer. It's not subjective or objective. It's kind of in the middle, but I do believe that there is a common ground of what is ugly and probably there's a common ground on what is beautiful. A bit like the Greeks.
Mm.
We would say that the beauty stated by the Greeks is an universal beauty. And then I don't know what can we say that is like objectively ugly in this social housing complex in this city is horrible.
Well, Thomas Heatherwick, a famous London architect,
The boring criteria.
talks a lot about this. So he talks about boring. So he will say, look at a flat building. So he kind of does it in stages. He'll take a flat looking building, which would be maybe a 1970s looking building in London, and it's just a flat facade and the windows just kind of blend into it. And he says it's boring. There's nothing interesting about it. There's no decoration, there's
Mm.
no ornamentation. And then he takes a Gaudi building, from Barcelona, and he looks at all the curves and all the swerves that go into it and the windows and everything. And it's an incredibly complex buildings. And he says this has interest.
Mm.
So it kind of delights you in a different way. So he is not talking about beauty in the same way
It's not, they
as
call it
much
boring.
as interest. So he's looking for kind of something that kind of captures you in a different way. And so now trying to tie this beauty back to your the way that you build or the way that you design, talking about curves, you think that curves are intrinsically more interesting. And so almost everything you do has these huge curves that go into that. And you like to build also on a very big scale.
Mm.
Is that right?
Yeah, I always prefer the large scale because it's easier to maneuver for me. I don't know why I never really developed the skill for small scale, but maybe one day.
Okay, so now the skill sets that you learned in traditional architecture. So you went to school for it, you worked at a big firm. Now you think to yourself, I've learned the software, I could teach this a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're online, there's a lot of people that also want to learn this, and you build a very big online presence in terms of your social media. Tell us about how you got into teaching.
Well, so there's one software that is quite important at Saha for design. Important now, it doesn't mean that like the tools are your DNA, but it is quite important, which is Maya from Autodesk. And I learned Maya before only. It's like a very niche software. It's not taught everywhere because it's not very common to do architecture with it. And the community still feels a bit, I think, unsafe with Maya. They still think that it can be replaceable with other softwares. I mean, I don't care, that's my software. And this is a software that is widely used at Zaha. It's the software that delivers the best curve for architecture, specifically architecture. And so before I joined Zaha, I learned it at DRL, at the postgrad that I was studying at. And the teaching was not very good. It was not very consistent. It was not very coherent. It did not give me the knowledge to start a building. So when I started Zaha, I was probably the worst at the I think humbly can understand that I was the worst with the software. Although I did start out, I was hired. And then the floor that I was at, so the department I was working with, they didn't hire for a long time before me, so I was like wildly disadvantaged, like when compared to everyone around me. And that's when I felt I need to learn this quick and well. So I started working past office hours just for the software. Like I would look at the picture and render and like try to get it in Maya from zero. So especially it's very scary when you start a file from nothing,
Mm.
from a torus or from a cube, and that's a kind of like a scary feeling that you get, that you need to practice as many times as you can to start from scratch. It's like the blank page kind of scary, and then you start, and then start, and then start, and I was doing that every day, like start from zero, start from zero.
This is when you were learning, when you were teaching?
Learning.
When you're learning, okay.
And then it's because I got that mindset of like not being scared of the white canvas, that got me into first designing well, because I'm not scared of the white canvas, which is something that a lot of people go through when they are creating. I mean, now you do AI and so on, so the white canvas scare kind of vanishes a bit. But I don't do it. I still open it in white and let my intuition like.
Do you do anything with pen and paper to start with?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so
Sometimes I do like a little trace of what's the type of detail I have in mind,
Hmm.
even if it's a micro detail of the building. And then when I model, I don't start from the micro detail, I start from the macro, and that leads to the micro.
And when you're teaching, I guess it could be anything. You're trying to teach them the tools, but when you have a real client, they've given you a scope, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying this is what it needs to be. It's either an office building or
Yeah.
it's an opera house or something like that.
Exactly.
So you take the scope of what this client has given you, and you have this blank page, and it's a bit daunting, and you have to try to come up with that concept. Now, would you say that concept is your strongest part of your
Yeah.
architecture? Because for a lot of people, I believe that in architecture, the architects have been given too much of a responsibility. It's too hard. They have to be creative people
I,
that are good at concepts, and then they have to be technical people
I know.
that can do, you know, almost engineering at some points, the amount that they're doing. So this might be going off on a bit of a tangent, but do you think that it might be a better world if we kind of separated two different architects into concept and implementation?
No, I think it's sort of an embedded common sense that you need to have when engineering and what is practical for architecture. It's almost the same as Portuguese is a kind of a complex language when it's compared to English. Um, it's almost the same as someone asking me, so when you're writing your book in Portuguese, do you think about the vocabulary? Do you think about your language? Do you need to learn Portuguese? Do you think you need, and you'd say, well, it's embedded in me, so I'm using my own language, but the art is the art of writing. You know what I mean? And in architecture, it's sort of the same. The art is the art of architecture, but there is a common sense that is embedded on what is doable, what is practical, what kind of structure would go with, and previous experience as well. So, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
It needs to be there. It can, otherwise you would be, and it's probably controversial in that sense, but otherwise you would be just art.
And that's interesting, difference between art and architecture. Okay, and now going back to your students, what kind of people? Are these already architects that are learning from this, or are these people that have never done it before?
Both. Some are 70-year-olds, some are like 17. I get both, yeah, which is quite interesting and very inspiring.
Really? And of any of the people that you've taught, um, learned it proficiently and been able to, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Some of them, yes, they did really well. And then some of them, I also get them to my studio. That's the goal, right?
Wow. So that's actually quite interesting. Are you using
Of
your teaching,
course.
doubling up by using it as a wide net to choose the best
Because I also
people?
teach the way that I design, which obviously people design differently. So I teach the way I design, and then I understand, I spot the people that are the better at, and then they keep coming to the course, and then they know how to design like me, which is great. Not exactly like you, but closer to you, because there's a part of intuition that
I
plays a big
never,
part.
I hadn't put the two and two together, but so you're kind of casting this wide net. You're being very social. You're on social media, and you're kind of using that to make contacts, meet clients, find the best employees.
And creating a big lab for your
Wow.
studio, that's key.
A lab.
That's
In
key.
terms of, what do you mean by lab? Like, is that for?
A lot, because you are testing your students as well, right? You're giving them challenges, you're seeing how they go about it. Obviously, knowing that they are starting with the software. It's not like I'm in a hiring process. I'm teaching them how to do the software.
Mm.
And some people really do get it. And the ones that get it, you see it immediately, even if they are like poor beginners. The way they get curves, that's another kind of conversation that we have between people who do curves. There are people who understand curves. There are people that no matter how much you're gonna try and learn how to do curves, you don't get that. Almost like understanding the beauty and the balance of curves. Some students, they really get it immediately.
Mm.
And it's not because, the skill on the software, it's because it's like embedded in them, understanding the beauty of the curve.
And do you think, so my deep interest is in building materials when it comes to development. So I love all kinds of stone. Do you think you can do curves with stone, or is it only for a modern material like steel and glass?
No, no. Curve with stone is beautiful.
I have to try to think of some examples of buildings like that. But London has some of the most beautiful buildings in the world. I think we're really lucky to be in London right now. And you chose London over anywhere in the world. I mean, you were in Portugal, you could have gone anywhere, and you chose London. Why did you do that? Is where the most creative people are? Is there the best buildings being built here?
Well, sorry for the heartbreak, Joe. I didn't choose London.
The only place.
It was not because London, but then I fell in love with London. But I didn't choose London. Although I love you, London, I'm sorry. I chose
Chose your office first?
not the office, the studio,
Studios.
be around.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that London has that is very unique.
Yeah.
That is bringing people from outside in, gathering them. It's like the living room.
We can cut this bit out and we can say,
Don't cut. This is the one we keep.
I'm just kidding. We could go back and be like, yeah, London's the best city in the world. That's where I wanted to go to. I'm just joking. So, okay. So, that's interesting. Okay, so we'll move on to a very complicated topic for me is understanding Web3.
Okay.
Okay. Why don't you start by summarizing it? Because I think that there's a lot of people that understand regular architecture. There's a lot of people that understand teaching, but I would say Web3 is probably the least understood, least well known. So,
Which is normal. Maybe it's almost the same as someone asking what the internet is. It's hard to explain, and it's hard to believe when you didn't have it, So it's kind of sort of the same.
yeah.
I think that now we are very aware that we are going to do it, that we're going to do immersive reality. But we were not aware when we changed from Web 1 to Web 2. But who told you? Who told you after Yahoo? Like, oh, by the way, we're going to start Web 2.
Let's take a step back. What is Web 1? What is Web 2? And what is
Okay.
Web 3?
So Web 1 is the beginning of the internet, which probably your viewers don't know because they're very young. But it's Yahoo. So the beginning of browsing and the beginning of www. That's web, World Wide Web. That's Web 1. And then slowly there was a group of people developing Web 2, which included, let's say it's the app world. So before there was no such thing as apps. Web 2 was apps, built by apps mainly, by Google, by, I don't know, Bolt, by any app that you have, any social media, by WhatsApp. And how crazy would it be if someone during Web 1 would tell you, you got to have these gigantic social media living rooms in your digital phone or in a a www. So these kind of concepts are developed, seamlessly without being pushed by anything. And we live them in 2D, which is probably a little bit more weird than saying that we're going to live it in 3D, because we don't live social experiences in 2D before. We never did that before. And we started with the 2D social experiments. I spend most of my social times on a screen in a 2D platform, which is kind of odd. And then we're going to jump very quickly into the 3D experience of that, the immersive one, the one that is exactly like this, but it's probably someone in Japan or in China. And I think that's the easiest way to see it, that Web 3 is just a three-dimensional experience of our Web 2. And Web 2 is actually more weird than the Web 3.
Web 2 is more weird than Web 3.
Yeah.
But do you think maybe it's too early to be calling it, to say that this is the new thing, when we can look at the past and we can say Web 1 and Web 2, but is it possible that Web 3 never materializes?
Well, unless we jump straight into Web 4. and we start 4K interactions.
Or but could Web3 be something else, like the AI language models, for example? Is that the third iteration of the web, or do you think the three-dimensional?
The AI large language models are very small inside of a Web3. They are part of one of the motors.
Okay.
It's like one tiny engine that is running on
Mhm.
a Web3 environment. Is not the reason why it exists, but it's a powerful one. For example, one that I give a, a big example that I use for use of AI in a Web3 environment. Um, Imagine that you're going for a concert. Imagine that you're opening your Spotify. So now you listen to music on a flat screen, right? You look at your Spotify, you see it on like a flat screen, you listen to music. But the next step, it's a very obvious next step, is to actually be immersed in a concert room or wherever you want on a festival while listening to your music. So you're not going to look at your screen, you can actually just have access to that inside of a concert hall, wherever you are. Even if you are in the street, you are on a bus, you're waiting for your bus, you are inside of the concert hall. But now imagine that the concert hall is totally empty, it's just you. Maybe you will enjoy it. Totally empty, just you and I don't know, Beethoven. And you're like, oh, this is so nice. A bit lonely, but interesting. Now imagine that you actually start playing with AI for NPCs, for avatars, with a very seamless reaction to the music. And I know that in your head you have this ugly ass avatars, but imagine they're extremely realistic, like I am. And this concert hall is not empty anymore, it's totally full. And you experience it with them. That's the use of AI in Web3. It's a tiny addition that makes a difference on the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people talk about this. Obviously, celebrities like Elon Musk, and I think for a lot of people, it's just impossible to imagine. But um, yeah, it's obviously very possible that we will not be able to distinguish at some point in the future
Really?
this kind of 3D immersive world versus reality. I don't know. These are words that I've heard, and when I've been listening
I know.
to speeches, I don't know if that's the case.
I also don't like apocalyptical takes on anything. I still think we like touch and we preserve like physical interactions over the digital ones, let's be fair.
Mm.
And probably the relationships that you value the most, you want to have them physically.
Maybe, but if you look at today, I would say most people's social interactions are actually over their phone. And it's kind of,
Mine is.
if you're keeping up with friends, I wonder if they did some kind of study where they saw how many conversations you had in the day, how many are
Yeah.
in person, how many are on your phone. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that some of it's toxic. I think it's one of those things where you've built this beautiful tool, not you, but the society has built a beautiful tool, the phone, and uh, if you use it effectively, it's incredible, and if you use it in a bad way, it's toxic. And so I think it's something that everyone battles, and I think it's an addiction similar to alcohol.
I agree.
Like
I think that anything that has the power to alienate you is an addiction, and everything that is taken in extremes is an addiction.
mm,
But then you can also track back to Greeks inventing theater,
mm,
which is entertainment and alienates people from reality. And you're like, well, if you watch theater every day, every minute, that's kind of an addiction.
Yeah.
You kind of lose ground with reality. It's the same.
maybe
And it's entertainment. Any entertainment medium, think about the TV was even more scary because people were like, oh no, this is a real people. You do feel alienated. You kind of forget about your reality. They got scared. And then we brought VR and it gets scarier. It's just everything in moderation. And then the big question is, yeah, it's true that our social interactions are mostly virtual. But then the question is, in the end of the day, who did you pick to meet physically?
mm.
And usually that is a very big tell of who do you really appreciate in your life.
Yeah, it's a greater cost, isn't it? And anyone can send a quick message to someone, but if you're willing to take that time out of your day to meet someone, it's a more special relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go back to what's your role in Web3
And we're
world?
architects.
Okay, now I think this is going to be hard for people to conceptualize. So you have to actually tell us what that means. You are building buildings in
Yeah.
the virtual world.
Well, the tendency of the virtual world these days, it's quite a sad one for architects, really. It's digital twins. And that means replicating your room with a scan in a virtual environment. And when you track back to where this room comes from, it was an architect who built it, most likely. So this build of this architect in specific is going to be replicated in digitally. exactly as it is. Now, as an architect, when you finish a project, you are able to stop and look and say, like, this could have been done better. If I didn't have gravity, maybe this could be a little bit more round and more comforting. Maybe the color is not correct. Maybe I wouldn't have picked that curtain if I did have unlimited cost. So the question is, should architects allow for digital architecture to be a replica of our physical one, knowing that we have so many constraints that are not empowering people enough, right? They are not giving the most out of space because we have so many constraints. Then what's the logic on replicating them in digital builds?
Okay, and let's try to get my understanding a little bit deeper on this, okay? Is there a finite amount of space in this digital world
Yeah,
to build?
and it costs money.
And it costs money. Who's controlling this world?
Nvidia,
Is NVIDIA,
streaming.
the same people that are responsible for building chips
Is that true?
or AI,
Ego.
created a world, and this is a part of their business, that they created a world in which there's a finite amount of space, and you need to buy real estate and then digitally build buildings in this virtual world. I mean, for me, this sounds insane.
Well, you have
And
two very strong players in here, which are exactly the same players as in a traditional internet browser. So on one side, you have communication, the communication industry, telecommunication, and communication industry. They actually have something called industrial metaverse that is going now. So who has the fastest, the most powerful communication between countries? For streaming time, for example, let's say that we are having a very easy way to understand. We are having a digital interaction, a physical one. You barely get me with lags, right? I speak, you hear, I speak, you speak, I hear. It has no lags. It's continuous. It's like on a phone call. When it's on the internet, you can have lags, and if this comes with pixels, you can have lags between avatars. So when I'm moving, are you gonna see me exactly moving at the same time as a digital avatar? Or are you going to see me with a lag? And this is called frame per second, which you would want to have it in 60 frame per second. And I know that we don't think about this when we are looking at digital interactions, but how you wouldn't stay very long in a digital space where I'm lagging, or when like I speak and then 5 seconds later you listen to me. This is the basics of communication. Now imagine this on a space that is streamed with pixels, right? With visuals, and they need to be seamless. The amount of communications that are under our oceans just to make this possible, or the amount of meetings, or the amount of people that are involved to make communication to be stronger, and which country is benefiting, because right now it's China actually having the strongest communication wire in ocean for this to happen.
Okay, so now we've established that this exists and that you're working on this, but I guess the first question I would ask is, why would anyone want this? What's the demand for it? Who's living in this world? Because I've never been. Have I ever been in this world? I don't know. Have I ever experienced this?
A typical, why would you want to call your mom when you're not at home? And to reach out to her even though you're not sharing the same space. It's exactly the same.
And is there a lot of people using this right now?
Yeah, younger people using it right now.
That's so fascinating that now I'm becoming an old person where
I know.
uh,
You know what is fascinating?
I didn't even know that this really exists.
It's crazy that we say it's fascinating, and how in like 20 years they were like, oh, they were saying it's fascinating. It's like the most seamless activity in the world that is like connecting to Zoom and speaking with other people, you know?
And you're confident that this is going to be, it's going to continue. There's no way that this technology is going to die or people aren't going to be interested in it. You think there's enough demand for it that people are willing to pay, they want to be there, they want to be involved with this.
It's a weird question because it's almost the same as saying, like, do you think that people will ever not use there will be a point and people will never use their phones anymore? I don't think so.
You think it's an inevitable that
Yes.
it's coming. Okay, and which are the biggest players? Because I guess I vaguely saw something in virtual reality to do with Facebook, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg talking about this. Is this a similar kind of thing?
Mhm. Hardware, software are the biggest players. Nvidia, everyone that is creating the cheaper pixel streaming. Because imagine the reason why you see a super low resolution environments, like the early metal ones, is because not everyone can afford like tiny pixels that makes the resolution of your screen, of your image, like really photorealistic. It's almost the same as our curves, right? A curve that is done like this or a curve that is done like this, the one that is done like this is probably needs more resolution. So tiny pixels, and your screen needs to allow tiny pixels. That's what NVIDIA does. That's why they're so powerful, because they can allow the tiny pixels.
I can definitely understand it from a side of gaming or entertainment, but I can't understand it really from a side of communication. Who would want to be in this world from that standpoint? But I could see that you building things in the gaming world would be very valuable, because I guess gaming is a kind of entertainment. Can you decipher those two worlds?
What do you think? What do you think the next step of a Zoom meeting will be? A digital next step, because it's not going to end as it is, right?
So you think that we will be able to be in a room?
What do you think? How do you envision it? If I ask you, what's the next step for Zoom?
I guess
For Zoom video calls.
I guess the way you phrase it is that you're in a conference room, everybody's sitting next to each other, and they're all in different places.
Yeah.
And I think that probably big firms, like I think I saw finance firms like Blackstone, do it well enough that there's TVs everywhere, right? And they're not actually in the three-dimensional world, but they've made it so that they can have a conference room and everyone feels like they're there just through a Zoom call.
Exactly.
And you think the next level of that will be virtually being there?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. It feels more natural than the 2D screens, right? Or to share your background.
Yeah, interesting. I think it's one of those things where if you're not in the world and you're not thinking about it every day, it's never passed my mind before. It's not something I think about. I spend a lot of my time thinking about how to build out of I love city planning, so a lot to do with how to make cities more beautiful, build buildings in which people are living on, you have 5-story buildings, people are shopping on the first floor and living on the other 4 floors. So kind of, I think the world is almost in a ugly enough place, or has been built so poorly to start with, that we actually have to go back to basics and look at the European model of city planning and actually apply that to a lot of the cities that have been built. So I think over the next...
I also hope that architects stop building in a way. I think it's time to stop. And that's one of the reasons why I like doing the digital world.
What do you mean architects should stop building? Who would do the building? Who would do the...
I feel like we're bringing sand to the beach very much. The amount of architects that we are issuing to the world and the amount of projects that we're commissioning that have no reason to be but a capital one, it does bother me a bit, to be honest. And I'm doing physical builds and I cannot complain. But when I'm doing them, there's a slight question of for what.
But that's funny, because now you're crossing over into a question that I think is obvious. So I was asking questions that you were laughing at. Now, to me, this is the basic economics, right? Is that there will be absolutely no stopping. It's going to be the most ferocious 50 years coming up as China pulls hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. India also has a big population. The building is going to be like nothing you've ever seen before. One of my favorite quotes, this is from a number of books, but from Heatherwick's book, was that during a 3-year period, I think it was between 2013 and 2016, China poured more concrete than the US did in the previous 100 years.
Oh my God.
Right?
But are we really happy about this? Because ethically, I feel like,
So concrete and steel are 2 huge problems for the environment, right? But they're the fundamental building blocks of literally every single building in the world. I mean, it's a minute rounding error number of what other things are built out of. And so anyway, taking it a step back, you're thinking a lot about Web3 or the digital world that I've never even thought about. And so those are the things that I would say I'm reading about more, or that really deeply interest me, is kind of going back to how we can make the real world incredibly beautiful. And I'm sure you feel the same way. Okay, so why don't you tell me how you sparse your 2 kind of deep interests? You're a real world architect, you're a digital architect. Which do you prefer? Which are you going to spend more time on over the next 5 or 10 years?
It's a hard question, because in reality, I feel very tempted to jump into the digital world, especially as an architect. Like the question is not, is it inevitable to build the Web3? No, it is. It's going to happen. The big question is, are architects going to be big players on it? And the answer is they should be.
Who else could there?
Players. And
Who else could there be?
everyone else. Everyone who is a 3D generalist would probably be higher for cheaper and faster than an architect. But then they forget everything else. They forget that when we crave for beauty, they forget that we crave for the future of spaces and the future of the typology and the future of practice. We understand future of architecture, and none of the other ones, with all due respect, and some of them I do know them personally, they don't see architecture like that. They don't see that the space should evolve in quality. They copy previous architecture. And that's what concerns me the most. And that's what makes me a bit upset, is why are architects not putting a step on this and being part of it?
Well, from someone that knows nothing about it, I guess I would think to myself, well, just press the erase button and you could just erase it and start again. Like, is it not something that it doesn't feel as meaningful as the real world? Because you could always just digitally delete and build a new building. Is it not you could just press a button or AI could generate millions of buildings? I don't know. I can't understand. Whereas in the real world, you build a building, it has huge environmental impact, has social impact. It's going to be there for 100 years. There's huge, huge implications to building a building. One single building could cost you $100 million or more. I mean, the vastness of the real world and real assets and the investable universe of the real world, I think must be dwarf the digital world, which I imagine is absolutely tiny in comparison right now.
And in reality, your digital world is going to be molded to you through AI, right? It's like you're going to have the type of space that you want and that you ordered. So it will be totally molded to you. But the question is, who is designing it, and does it make you a better person to have? I don't know. Like, I don't know if you saw in what's the name, Sandbox, or one of these digital worlds, there was a gigantic dick building somewhere in a plot, and you're like, well, some creator wanted that, now we have to live with it in this digital arena. Or it's the same as like a WhatsApp background, let's say, something like this that was decided for you and not by you. That kind of things. And if you spend 10 hours on a WhatsApp, it can be very annoying to have I don't know, a dick pic there, for example, that was decided for you. So it has the same relevancy. It's the question is, where do you spend most of your time, right? Because do you spend most of your time walking down London, central London, downtown? You don't. You go there on a Sunday. But do you spend a lot of time on Zoom? You probably do spend more time on Zoom. So which environment actually is worth more in this case? Dun, dun, dun.
A depressing thought. I hope I spend more time in downtown. I love.
You don't. So that's
I
the problem.
actually do.
We are romantics, but we don't.
I love walking the city, so I actually spend a huge amount of time. I think that's like a very enjoyable way, walking along the river
Me too.
from South Bank.
The only creator that I've paid for Patreon is an old man called John something, who just walks in London on YouTube, and it's digital. Even that, I'm working, I'm listening to a man
Connect.
walking in London and saying the history of London. I'm like
Wow.
looking at the whole, and here was born. I was like, wow. Then I'm like,
I'm not trying to advocate for the digital world because I don't quite believe
of
in
course,
it.
it feels
but-
feels artificial. I know it is artificial.
What I'm hearing from what you're saying there is that there's going to be they're going to collide in some way. The digital world and the real world are going to kind of come together, and we're going to be sitting in both of them. I don't know. Is that what you're saying?
It is what I'm saying, but it's not like a prediction. It is a natural evolution of things. I just want architects to be involved because it can look really bad if they are not.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's the only thing that I'm here for on my career, is to make sure that architects show the true potential of designing virtual worlds by architects who have designed previous cities, uh, by architects, from architects to people. So I hope that this is what's going to pass, honestly.
Okay, so now we've talked about the three parts of your life, the real world architecture from your first career. We've talked about your teaching, and then now we've talked about Web3. Let's talk a little bit about something I'm interested in and just love to hear your thoughts on it. So my deep interest, as I said before, is about living in beautiful cities, and we kind of touched on that with London. Do you have any favorite cities around the world that you think we should shape the world in if you had to choose?
Oof, that's so hard. And it's hard not to be biased.
So, and maybe you could tell us if you think Lisbon is one of those
So, of course, I'm going to say list.
cities. Why don't you tell us about a few of your favorite buildings or structures in Lisbon that you think are important, I don't know, to the social fabric of the city?
Well, It is biased because one time I saw a phrase by Rafael Moneo, no, I was like 22 or 23, and it made so much sense back then. And it's still, now I'm 35, I still think it makes it, he was so right in what he said. He said, architects are architects of one city only. Regardless of how many cities you do, you're the architect of one city. And I think that even living in London for 10 years, Lisbon is my city. It is the city that I have at the palm of my hands. Like I would know everything about it. Each space, each hill, the history of each hill. And I would be very biased to describe it to you, but why not? And
Um,
it has a very particular geography that is very much part of the identity of the city. It creates some kind of nostalgic and romantic relationship with the infinity line because you are on very high points, and that gives you like a very long horizons. And it's also it has a big river, it's close to the Atlantic Ocean, so usually your horizon would be the ocean, and that's what people say to be kind of your confrontation with the abyss, with the end of life. That's what usually the horizon means in psychology or in philosophy. And Lisbon gives you that moment, those moments many times. So when you're going up, you either look up at the buildings, or when you turn, you see that little line in the horizon, which makes you think and pause and, you know, have that bit of nostalgia. And Lisbon has 7 of these, 7 hills. So I feel that the identity of the city is very melancholic in that sense. Yes, it's lively and people are happy and so on, but there's also like this kind of heavy melancholy that I really like in the city. And then the lights and the shadows are like extremely part of it. The fact that it has an Arabic grid in the city center, it makes it very unexpected when you're walking and wandering. A bit like London, also very unexpected when you turn. But London has a bit of expectancy because, you know, they had to rebuild it since the fire. But Lisbon still kept some very original Arabic street design. And that's another part of the city that I absolutely love. Yeah, my city.
and any iconic buildings there? And another question, as well as the iconic buildings, do you think that a city kind of is defined by its one or two iconic buildings, maybe from the way that we see the world through Heatherwick and through Norman Foster, these big one-off buildings, or Frank Gehry?
Hmm.
Or do you think it's about maybe a whole collection and a community, maybe like the buildings in Barcelona, how there's so many beautiful
Yeah.
apartment buildings can make a city?
That's a very beautiful assessment of it. No, it doesn't have landmarks. Like Barcelona, you do have a landmark.
It's both, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you kind of have both. But Lisbon does not live off from a landmark.
Yeah.
You don't go there for that landmark. You go there for the grid and for the experience on ground floor. So when I think about it like very deeply, what is the one landmark? Will probably be plazas, because you have very narrow streets and then opens up and you have like these orange trees, and it has like a very specific strong smell of flowers, and then you go through like another street and then a plaza. That's probably part of its identity more than, oh, I got to that building, you know. And actually the center of the city leads you to a plaza, non-religious one, which is very rare, and it's right in front of the river. So yeah, I don't think it lives off from landmarks.
Okay, very good. And so do you think you would love to build something in Lisbon that kind of contributed to the skyline at some point? Is that a dream?
No. No headache. No way.
You think it's too much?
Yeah, I think I don't want to go through the headache.
Okay. For me, I love Europe. I think that Europe has done such an amazing job. If you've been to Prague, um, or Rome, or Madrid or Lisbon or London, I think there's just so many amazing cities here, and I think it doesn't compare to anywhere else in the world. I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of other places, and I think they've missed out on the walkability, the kind of the low skylines you can walk through. There's
I agree.
lots of beautiful ways, and I think of a city as ways to build relationships. You're building a relationship with the city, but you're building a relationship with other people that you're walking around with
Yeah.
as well. And I think that if there's too much driving, or the city is too wide, like maybe Los Angeles, it's incredibly difficult to build that relationship
Yeah,
with the city. So
I agree. And also another important part about Mediterranean cities, or let's say European cities, is the fact that they were able to keep tracking time built, so you can track it back to the 10th and then to the 12th and then to the 13th and then to the 15th. So they are very linear in time.
Mhm.
And that's a skill for any city to be that linear, even like to escape some catastrophes. And it's also a skill to be able to retain those connectors. But I would also say that we have been probably a bit too obsessed on keeping these old connectors, and we are forgetting that if we don't build the present buildings, there will be a time that they will build, and there will be a huge disconnection from one to the other one. And the more we preserve and we stay fixated on the idea of preserving, and the more we are extremely doubtful and anxious for new builds, right? We're like, oh, is a new build? I think probably are traumatized with postmodern, you know? We're like, oh, what's coming? What's coming? So we kind of like try to avoid the new build, but I think people are forgetting that someone will do it, and the longer the span of time is, the bigger the shock is going to be. So I still urge for Mediterranean and Central European cities to keep this linearity in time, because everyone is going to need it, right? To read the city like the palm of your hands.
Okay, beautiful. Well, we'll finish there. So, Mariana Cabugueira, thank you so much for your time.
Joe, thanks you.